Hello and welcome to the Complete SQL Bootcamp. Hello everyone, and welcome to the course curriculum lecture for the Complete SQL Bootcamp. In this lecture, we're going to go over the entire course's curriculum and understand the building blocks that make up this course. To begin, you'll start off by installing PostgreSQL and pgadmin. We have full installation walkthroughs for both Windows and Mac computer systems. Once we've done that, we'll start off with some basic sections. The first section will cover databases and table basics. Then, we'll learn about SQL statement fundamentals. In that section of the course, you'll finally begin to use SQL syntax to query the database and the tables you created in the previous section. Then, we'll step it up a notch by learning about the group by clause. And once we finish that, you'll have your first assessment test during the course. Once you've completed that first assessment test, you'll learn about joins, some more advanced SQL commands, and then you'll have a second assessment test to test your understanding of everything you've learned up to this point in the course. After that, you'll have your final sections. You'll learn how to create databases and tables directly through a SQL syntax. Then, you'll have your third assessment test that will test your knowledge on creating databases and tables directly through SQL. Then, we also have some extra bonus lectures. The lectures in these topics include views, using PostgreSQL with the Python programming language, as well as some special discount offers for my other courses. With that all being said, let's go ahead and get started with the entire course so we can build up our knowledge. Thanks everyone, and I'll see you at the next lecture. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Database Overview lecture. So in this lecture, we're going to learn what are databases and why use databases. And after we answer those two fundamental questions, we'll get a sense of where this course fits in the realm of things. So let's start off with a basic definition. Databases are systems that allow users to store and organize data, and they're useful when dealing with large amounts of data. So you might be wondering, what do the typical users look like who deal with databases? Well, databases actually have a wide variety of users. These can include analysts, such as a marketing analyst, a business analyst, or a sales or sales operation analyst, or more technical people like data scientists, software engineers, or web developers. Basically, anyone needing to deal with data has a great use case to work with a database. So, since most users have some familiarity with a spreadsheet software, either Google Spreadsheets or Microsoft Excel, what we're going to do is discuss the transition from going from spreadsheets to databases. So let's go ahead and discuss some use cases for spreadsheets versus use cases for databases, and then leverage that knowledge to better understand databases. So spreadsheets are really good for a one-time analysis or to quickly need to chart something out, such as in Excel, and they work with reasonable dataset sizes, something that Excel or Google Spreadsheets can open up really easily. And what's really nice about spreadsheets is they allow the ability for untrained people to work with data. So anyone can just double-click an Excel file and open it and work with it. However, they do have downsides where databases really shine. So databases are really great for data integrity, meaning you don't want to have someone be able to just click on a cell and change the data. Databases don't really allow for that. And they can also handle massive amounts of data. Data sizes that would just basically make Excel or Google Spreadsheets crash. And they can also quickly combine different data sets, something that might be difficult to do for larger data sets in a spreadsheet. They also are perfect for automating steps for reuse due to the SQL syntax, which we'll learn about later. And they can also support data for websites and applications. So most websites and web applications or mobile applications are linked to some sort of database to store their data and retrieve their data. So let's go ahead and leverage that knowledge from spreadsheets to understand databases and see the similarities between them. So here we have a picture of looks like a normal spreadsheet. Here we have the columns. It's just a basic glucose tracking spreadsheet. And we have columns such as time, some measurements, etc., and various rows with different data points. And then at the bottom here we have tabs, which are referencing various sheets in the spreadsheet software. Here we're using Excel. So when we're transitioning from a spreadsheet to a database, we can think of a database's tables as the tabs of a spreadsheet. So since each of those tabs of the spreadsheet handles various types of data or different rows and different columns, those tabs will translate to tables in a database. So that a database is made up of many tables. And then those tables are made up of rows and columns. So the columns in the table of a database is basically exactly what you would think as a column in a spreadsheet. It's just a vertical column that denotes a certain data type. So for instance, the first one here we have time. Second one we have measurements. So columns in spreadsheets are basically the same as columns in the table of a database. And then the other feature we have from a spreadsheet to a database is going to be rows. And rows, again, behave exactly like you would expect them to in a database table. They're just the actual row of all that data for a certain data point. So in this case, we're highlighting the data points 7, 8, and 9, and then all the measurements for those columns. So again, databases, instead of tabs, they're going to have tables, and those tables are also going to have rows and columns. And you can basically just imagine them as spreadsheets, just much larger that you can't individually click on. Okay, so again, we have columns, rows, and instead of tabs, we're going to have tables. So what are our database platform options? Well, there's actually lots of database platform options, a lot more than what I've put here, but here are some of the main ones. You have PostgreSQL, you have things such as MySQL, and MySQL Server Express, Microsoft Access, and then SQLite. Each of these has their pros and cons, but we're going to be focusing on PostgreSQL. The reason for this is because PostgreSQL is free, it's open source, it's widely used on the internet, it's multi-platform, so meaning if you have various operating systems like Windows or Mac users, you can all use PostgreSQL. And one of my main reasons for choosing it is that it's super easy to install and just hit the ground running. So PostgreSQL is a great database choice for learning how to use SQL. And SQL is a structured query language, that's what it stands for, and it's what we're going to learn in this course. SQL is going to be the way we communicate with our database. It's the way we're going to be able to communicate with the database to get data out of it or put data into it. And the SQL learned in this course can be applied to a variety of databases or SQL-based software. So we're not going to pigeonhole ourselves to just PostgreSQL. What you learn in this course, you're going to be able to apply it to a variety of databases or software that uses SQL. So for example of what a general SQL syntax would look like, it would look something like this. Select some column names from a table, and then you have some functions or clauses. Here I'm ordering by the first name. So we're going to learn how to write and use SQL syntax like this in this course. So SQL is actually useful for a lot of things. Everything I've listed here runs on some sort of syntax of SQL. So you have PostgreSQL or MySQL or Oracle databases, Microsoft Access, etc. The basic databases you would think of that can use SQL, but there's also a lot of software out there that uses SQL as a way of interacting with your data, such as Looker or Periscope data. And there's also some abstractions that run on top of big data systems, such as Hadoop. And you can use SQL with Hive or Google's BigQuery or Facebook's Presto, which is basically using SQL to run on top of very large data systems that use distributed data. So SQL is going to be incredibly useful to operate a variety of tools and databases with. So you're also going to be notified if any of the SQL commands we learn in this course are specific to the PostgreSQL environment. Most of the commands we learn are actually just going to be general SQL, so you won't get too many of these notifications. Basically, everything you learn here, you're going to be able to apply directly to any conventional SQL database. Okay, let's go ahead and review what we learned. We learned what a database is, why we should use a database. We learned about the various SQL options, and we also learned how to use SQL skills in this course and how we're going to be able to apply them to many other software programs. Okay, with that being said, let's go ahead and continue and learn some more. Thanks everyone, and I'll see you at the next lecture. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Installation and Setup lecture. It's time to get set up for the course. In this lecture, we're mainly going to be installing two things. One is PostgreSQL, which is a SQL engine that stores data and then reads in our query and returns back information from the database. The second thing we're going to install is pgadmin. This is a graphical user interface that lies on top of PostgreSQL that just makes it easier for us to have a graphical interface in which to type our queries. So it'll directly connect with PostgreSQL and just make things like restoring a database a lot easier. Please note that we want to make sure you follow each step in order carefully. There's two really common confusion points during the installation process. One is we have a database file called dvdrental.tar file as a resource in this lecture. Do not open that file directly. Often students get confused because it looks like a PDF or the computer recognizes it as a different type of file. You don't need to worry about any of that. Later on, we'll just download it, but do not open it directly. The second really common confusion point is forgetting the password you set up for PostgreSQL. It's really important that you write down and remember that password when that step comes. Alright, so to help avoid any missed steps, we've gone ahead and numbered the steps. So as we go through this, you should be able to follow along and you'll see step 1, step 2, step 3, etc. So we'll present them in the correct order for you. Let's go ahead and get started. Step number 1 is to download and install PostgreSQL. Let's head over to an internet browser. Alright, go ahead and in your browser go to google.com and then search for PostgreSQL, hit enter, and the very first link that isn't an advertisement should be www.postgresql.org. So we'll go ahead and click on that. This is the official site for PostgreSQL. And then this takes us to the official site. And essentially somewhere on this page, you should see a download button. Go ahead and either click up here where it says download or click the download button here. This site page does change from time to time, so you may have to look around to see where the download button is. But overall, we want to click to download, and it's typically at postgresql.org/download. And then as we come down here, we'll see something called different binary packages for Linux, then there's macOS, Solaris, Windows, etc. There's also the source code. Right now, I'm on a Windows computer, so I will go ahead and click Windows for the correct download. And then you'll notice that it says Interactive Installer by Enterprise DB. There's also different information on platform support. You may have to choose a different version depending on what version of Windows you're running. If you're running an older version of Windows, especially a 32-bit version of Windows, you may need to download a lower version of PostgreSQL. So quickly make sure that the version of Windows you're running is compatible with whatever PostgreSQL version you install. Okay, I'm going to come back up here and then hit download the installer. Keep in mind, this does change from time to time as far as the description. It may say graphical installer by Enterprise DB, but overall, we're getting the installer from Enterprise DB. Go ahead and click on that. it will take you to enterprisedb.com, download, etc. And you're going to click the correct download version for you. So right now I'm running on a Windows computer. I'll go ahead and just select the most recent version. If you're running on an older Windows computer, you may have to downgrade to a lower version. So we're going to go ahead and look at the Windows column and then hit download. Okay, so your download should begin automatically. Here you can see I'm on Google Chrome, and over here on the bottom left, it's downloading that PostgreSQL executable file. I'm going to fast forward in time until this is done downloading. All right, that's done downloading for me, so I will go ahead and open up that executable file. Upon launching that executable file, you should see the Setup Wizard pop up. If for some reason you don't see the Setup Wizard pop up, make sure that you don't have a firewall blocking this installer from opening, especially if you're on a work computer or business internet connection. Okay, so here we have Setup PostgreSQL. We'll go ahead and click Next. Go ahead and please specify the directory. I recommend just choosing the default installation directory. Go ahead and click Next. And then it's going to ask you to select what components you want to install. Go ahead and just leave everything selected as is. Notice that it's selected pgadmin 4 for us anyways. We'll go ahead and just leave everything as the default. Click Next. And then go ahead and select the data directory of where to store the data. Make sure you choose the default. And this is the extremely important part. It's asking us to please provide a password for the database super user. So you have to absolutely make sure that you remember this password. I highly recommend that you make it something extremely simple, just like password in all lowercase. This isn't really a security issue since it's just a learning exercise. We will be just running this locally on our computer. So I'm not too concerned about someone hacking into my computer. So I'll just say password and then password. There's no way I can really help you if you forget what this password is. So if you forget what this password is, you're essentially going to have to uninstall everything and reinstall all over again. So please, if you name your password something else that's difficult to remember, write it down somewhere. I cannot help you if you forget this password. Okay, so I set up my password as just lowercase password. We will be asked for this later on. Next, it's going to ask you to please select the port number the server should be listening on. By default, it should say the port number is 5432. If you get another number like 5433 or 5434, etc., that's okay too. We can later on show you how to make sure you're connecting to the correct port number when we install pgadmin. Most likely, by default, you have 5432, unless for some reason you may have maybe an older version of PostgreSQL on your computer already existing and listening on a specific port. So we have it right now as default as 5432, so we'll keep it that way. We'll go ahead and click Next. It's going to ask you to select the location to be used by the new database cluster. Go ahead and just leave it as the default location. Hit Next. And then it's going to tell you all the settings you just chose. That's okay too. Hit Next. Setup is ready to install. Hit Next. And let's go ahead and let it install. And this essentially concludes step number 1. I'm going to fast forward in time until this is done installing. All right, this is done installing. You'll notice at the very end it asks you if you want to launch Stack Builder. You don't need to launch that, so I'm going to unclick the launching of that and then just hit Finish. That's the end of step 1. It's time to move on to step number 2. Just download and install pgadmin. To start off, go ahead and go to your browser and then go to google.com and search for pgadmin. I'm going to do that now. Okay, here I am at google.com. I search for pgadmin, and the first thing that should pop up that isn't an advertisement is pgadmin.org. Go ahead and select that link. It'll take you to this website, pgadmin. pgadmin is the graphical user interface that we're going to be using to actually perform queries and connect to PostgreSQL during the course. And what's interesting about pgadmin, it actually uses your browser as the graphical user interface. So after we install it, we'll be able to open it up within our browser. So somewhere along this page, you should see a download button. So it's either going to be up here in download, or there's quick links here for both an online demo if you want to check it out. You can open this up and try it out here in your browser, start a situation, and it sets something up for you. And it has a little bit of a sandbox here that you can check out. It'll kind of play around with a certain thing, ask you for your email address, etc. But in our case, we're going to go ahead and leave this and just click on download, since we're going to be installing it anyways. There's 2 versions of pgadmin, pgadmin 4 and then pgadmin 3. Keep in mind, if you're running an older version of Windows, you may need to use pgadmin 3 instead of pgadmin 4. And even though it says pgadmin 3 is no longer supported, that just means that they're not updating it anymore, which makes sense if you're running an older version of Windows. So if you're on an older version of Windows, like Windows 7 or something, you may need to actually use pgadmin 3. But if you're on the latest version of any of these operating systems, Mac OS, Windows, some Linux distribution, you should be good for pgadmin 4. I'm going to go ahead and click on Windows. Since I'm on a Windows computer, you realize there's multiple versions of pgadmin 4. They keep releasing updates to it, and I'm going to hit on pgadmin 4 version 4.18, the latest version released. So I'll click on that, and it's going to take me to something that looks like this. And it's a little confusing at first, but essentially all we need to download is the actual executable file that's within this. And if you take a look, it should be the largest file we're actually downloading. So go ahead and download this executable file for pgadmin. And you can see down here, it's downloading. It'll be done in a few seconds. Once you've gone ahead and downloaded the executable file, go ahead and open it up and run it. Keep in mind, you may need to run it as an administrator. So make sure you have admin permissions on your computer, and you can right click and run this as an admin. So I'll click on that. And now we have the setup wizard for pgadmin. Most of this, we're just going to choose a default. So we'll go ahead and click next, accept the agreement, hit next, select the default location. That's going to be okay. Hit next. It's going to ask you what you want to call the start menu option. Let's go ahead and click next, and then just hit install. Okay, and that's pretty much it for installing pgadmin. I'm going to fast forward until this is done installing. And now it's finished installing. We are not actually going to launch pgadmin yet. We have step number 3 to move on here. So you can go ahead and unclick the launch pgadmin 4 and then just hit finish. It's now time for step 3 of our process, where we're going to download, but remember, do not directly open the dvdrental.tar file. The dvdrental.tar file is a compressed version of the database we're going to be using for this course. You can download it as a resource in this lecture. Keep in mind that we're only downloading it. Do not attempt to unzip it or try to open it with any other program. It may say that the file is damaged and Windows can't find a program to open it with. That's okay. This file is not meant to be opened by anything other than pgadmin. So please do not double click on this file after downloading it. The only thing we're going to do is download the file. Let's see how to do that. If you check out the Udemy support page on downloading supplemental resources, as you're watching this particular video, over on the right-hand side, you should see a little resources button pop up, and then you'll see the dvdrental.tar file. So what that's actually going to look like is you'll be watching the Complete SQL Bootcamp, and then over here on the actual lecture, you'll hit resources and then select dvdrental.tar. Go ahead and click on it, and it should download. And I'm going to open the file location. Recall, do not double click or open this .tar file directly. You can see here that I now have it underneath my downloads under dvdrental.tar. Things that are important to keep in mind is to not directly double click or open on this file. And the second thing to keep in mind is you must know the exact location of this file. So I know that it's underneath my downloads folder. If you have any questions of where this file is actually located, you can always right click and then select properties, and you'll see the full location right here of wherever it happens to be on your computer. We're going to need that when we actually restore the file. Okay, so that's all you need to do is download it as a resource from this lecture. Do not open it and do not double click it. All right, step number 4 is to go ahead and restart your computer. To make sure all the actual changes due to PostgreSQL and pgadmin have taken place, we need to restart the computer. I'm going to go ahead and restart my computer and then move on to step number 5. Step number 5 is to restore the database. A quick note on this step is you can ignore the failed exit code that may appear during the restoration. Depending on your exact version of your operating system and the exact version of the PostgreSQL you installed, there is sometimes a failed exit code that appears that basically indicates that the restoration accidentally happened twice. That's totally okay, because what happens is it works the first time and then it doesn't do it a second time because the first time worked. So you'll be able to safely ignore that failed exit code if it does appear. So let's go ahead and open pgadmin to get started. So on your computer, go ahead and search for pgadmin, make sure you're actually opening pgadmin, the application, and not the executable file. Otherwise, you'll just end up reinstalling it. So don't click on this executable file, but instead click on the actual pgadmin program, this application. So I'm going to open that up, and what's going to happen is you should see it eventually open up in the browser. Okay, and here it is in the browser. Notice that right now it's running in the browser. This doesn't actually mean it requires an internet connection to run. It's just using the actual browser as a graphical interface. Then it asks you to set a master password. I would highly recommend that you set this to something very simple and easy to remember, since you're going to need this later on. I'm going to just set the password to password in all lowercase, which actually matches that PostgreSQL password we'd set up earlier. Then we'll go ahead and click OK. And now it's time to restore the database. If you click here on servers, you may actually see various versions of PostgreSQL depending on which one you've installed. If you followed along with me, most likely you'll just see PostgreSQL 12. I've actually installed different versions of PostgreSQL on this computer, so I see all the options. But in your case, you're most likely just going to see PostgreSQL 12. We'll go ahead and click on PostgreSQL 12, and you can double click on this, and then it's going to ask you to enter the password for the user Postgres. This is the exact same password we initially set up during the installation of PostgreSQL. So I will say lowercase password, and go ahead and save the password. That way you don't need to enter it every time. So again, all I did was I double clicked on PostgreSQL 12. It's going to connect to the server using the password that I set up earlier. Hit OK. And now you should see it connected with this little elephant symbol. So I've connected to my server and everything's good to go. If you get an error there on the Postgres, you can try leaving the password blank, but really, most likely you enter the password wrong and you may need to go back and look down to where you wrote that password. Now it's time to actually restore the database. So we've connected to a server. You'll notice that there's that default Postgres database. So next we're going to right click on PostgreSQL 12 after connecting to it. And then we're going to say create a database. And then the database we're going to create is called DVD rental. And then we'll say save. And then that creates what is essentially this little empty database here. So you can go ahead and click on it, and we can see that the database is created, but right now there's no tables or information in this database. So we're going to restore the database. And we do that by right-clicking now on that database and going down here, and we're going to say restore. Click on restore, and make sure that underneath format it says custom or tar file. And then what we're going to do is we're going to grab that dvdrental.tar file location and pass it here as file name. Now there's two ways of doing this. One is to click on these three little dots and then search around for wherever you happen to save that file. And keep in mind, you may need to show hidden files and folders and have all files as the format. And you can see here, I have found dvdrental.tar, and then I can select it. And here now I have the full file path. Now, what sometimes occurs is when you click these 3 points, you actually are in a weird location on your computer and you can't actually find it. You can try navigating using this home or using backup, and sometimes you're in this kind of weird location and you don't really know how to actually find that dvdrental.tar file. That's totally okay. All you need to do is just manually type in the file name. So how can we do that? Well, I can come back to where I actually saved that dvdrental.tar file. Recall I can click on properties here, and then all I need to do is just copy and paste this location. So I'll go ahead and copy that, and then I could manually paste it in here. That's now the location, and then just add in dvdrental.tar file. So you have two options. One is to try to locate the file using this little graphical user interface. If you're doing that, make sure you're showing hidden files and folders, as well as showing all files. And you can navigate by going back home here or going back, etc. Or you can just manually type out the file name. So if this 3-dot version doesn't work for you, just go ahead and manually type it out. Then we're going to come to restore options, and we're going to make sure that we select pre-data as yes, data as yes, and then post data as yes. Okay. Those are actually the only sections that we need to worry about as far as these restore options are concerned. You can leave everything else as the default. We'll come back to General, and then we'll go ahead and select Restore. Click on Restore, it'll say Restore Job Created. Now, depending on your actual version of PostgreSQL, you may see this little failed execode pop up. And it'll say failed execode 1. You can go ahead and click on more details. And if you read these details, it's essentially just saying, hey, it failed to create it twice. So sometimes on certain systems, it accidentally creates it twice. That's totally okay. We can safely ignore that. So what we're going to do here is our DVD rental .tar file has been successfully restored. The only thing we need to do now is refresh in order to actually see those changes. So I'm going to right click on DVD rental. You'll notice it has this refresh. Go ahead and refresh. And now what's going to happen is underneath the actual DVD rental database, we should be able to perform a sample query to make sure everything's running. So I'm going to right click and then I'm going to select Query Tool. Query Tool is essentially what we're going to be using for the rest of the course. And this allows us to actually perform a query and then ask for information back. So we're going to say select and then an asterisk from film semicolon. And then to run this, you can go ahead and click this little play button. So it's the execute refresh. Go ahead and run that. And you should see now under data output some actual information here. Okay, and if you see this information, then everything was successful. If for some reason it says film does not exist, which is sometimes a common error, make sure you restart your computer. If it still doesn't say that film does not exist, go ahead and try a lower version of PostgreSQL, because most likely what's happening is your specific OS doesn't work with that specific version of PostgreSQL. So you can just repeat the steps for any previous version of PostgreSQL. But we can see here that everything is working, and this is what we're going to be using for the rest of the course. So we can check out this query editor anytime by clicking underneath the version of PostgreSQL, underneath databases, DVD rental, right click, and then you would just hit Query Tool. Okay, and that's it for how to perform a query with pgadmin and successfully restore the database. If you have any questions, please make sure to check out the Q&A forums. We have hundreds of already answered questions there, so I would highly recommend you check those out first before posting a new question in order to save yourself some time. Thank you so much, and I'll see you at the next lecture. Hello everyone, and welcome to the installation and setup lecture for macOS users. So it's time to get set up for the course. In this lecture video, we're going to be installing two main things. One is PostgreSQL, which is the actual SQL engine that stores the data, has the database, reads in queries, and returns back information from that database. The second thing we're going to be installing and setting up is pgadmin. pgadmin is the graphical user interface that we will use in order to connect with the backend of PostgreSQL. Now, there's a couple things to note here. First thing to note is please make sure to follow each step in order very carefully. If you do these steps out of order or mess a certain part of each step up, then you may have to go back and restart from the very beginning. There's two really common confusion points. One is later on we're going to download a file called dvdrental.tar file. Do not open that tar file directly. We'll show you how to deal with it later on. And also later on we're going to set up a password for both PostgreSQL and pgadmin. Make sure you do not forget that password and make sure you write it down somewhere. Okay, so to help avoid any missteps, we've gone ahead and numbered the major steps, and we'll present them right now in the correct order. So let's get started with step number 1, which is to download and install PostgreSQL. For step number 1, I'm going to head over to the Google Chrome browser and then go to google.com. Okay, here I am at google.com. Go ahead and search for PostgreSQL in Google. Just hit Google search. And the first thing you should see after advertisements is the official website, which is postgresql.org. And then click on this official site for PostgreSQL, and it should look something like this. Keep in mind, this page does get updated from time to time, but this is where we're going to be downloading PostgreSQL. And somewhere on this page, you should see a download button. It'll either just be really obvious here and download or appear at the top. So go ahead and click download. That will take you to the core distribution page, and you'll see the different packages There's the Linux packages, the Windows packages, etc. But right now we're focusing on Mac OS. Since I'm on a Mac right now, I'll click on Mac OS, and then you'll see here there's different options for the Mac OS packages, and then there's also different versions for platform support. So depending on what version of the 64-bit macOS platform you have, you may actually need to download a lower version of PostgreSQL. So make sure that you actually check that your macOS platform is going to correspond to whatever version of PostgreSQL you have. So again, older Macs will need to go with older PostgreSQLs. Okay, so in general, I'm just going to use the latest one since I'm on macOS Catalina, and I'm going to click right here where it says Interactive Installer by Enterprise DB. I'll click on Download the Installer, and this will take me to the Enterprise DB download page. And here we can see for Mac OS, go ahead and choose the corresponding PostgreSQL version. You can check on the last page to see what version of Mac OS corresponds to which version of PostgreSQL it supports. I'm on the latest version of Mac OS, so right now the latest version of PostgreSQL supports that. I'll go ahead and click Download here under Mac OS 10. And then go ahead and let it download. It should download this zip file somewhere onto your computer, and then I'll go ahead and save it underneath my downloads folder. So go ahead and click Save, and then it's going to download that zip file for us. Okay, I'm going to fast forward in time until this is done downloading. Okay, this has now finished installing, so what I'm going to do here is, if you see it in Finder, we have this zip file. I'm going to go ahead and just open it with the default archive utility. That will unzip this right here underneath downloads. And you'll see here that I now have this PostgreSQL OS X. Go ahead and double click on that. And then you may get this notification saying it's an app downloaded from the internet. Are you sure you want to open it? Go ahead and click open. For some people, they have their macOS settings that says it doesn't allow them to open unidentified developers or unidentified applications. You'll have to go to your settings and change that. And if you just Google search the actual terms that macOS returns to you about opening stuff from unidentified developers, it'll show you how to open that very easily through a Google search. But in my case, it's just asking me if I want to open it. Go ahead and select open. It may ask you for your password. Go ahead and provide it. And the installer should begin. So here's the setup wizard. I'm just going to hit next here. Go ahead and choose the default directory. And then you'll notice there's some components here that it's going to install. Go ahead and just select them all. Have all the defaults selected, hit next. Go ahead and select the default for the data directory of where it's going to save our data. And this is the extremely important part. There's a password here that you need to provide. And if you ever forget this password, you'll need to essentially uninstall everything and reinstall from the beginning. So I highly recommend that you put in a password here that you know you're going to remember. So what I like to do is I just like to type in password in all lowercase. So we'll say password. Since this is on our own computer, we don't need to worry about any sort of security issue with this. So I'm just typing password in all lowercase. Again, you must remember this password. If you decide to do something more complicated, make sure you write down this password somewhere else, because if you forget this password, there's really nothing I can do for you on my end. You'll need to uninstall and reinstall everything. So this is a very important step where you must remember this password. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and hit next. All right, the next thing you're going to do is select a port number the server should be listening on. Depending if you've already installed PostgreSQL before or not, you may see a different port number here than what I have. Currently, I have 5433. It's really common that it shows up as 5432. But whatever the default value is here, go ahead and just leave it be. So my default right now is on 5433, which essentially means that port is open and the server can listen on it. It's essentially going to be the connection of where PostgreSQL is going to live. And keep in mind that if you have a corporate firewall, you want to make sure that it's not blocking this sort of port. So later on when you're running pgadmin, if you see that your firewall is blocking that port, go ahead and allow your firewall to connect with PostgreSQL and this particular port number. So it provided me a 5433. If it provides you with a higher number or a lower number, that's totally okay. Just select the default, hit next, and then select the default location for the new database cluster, hit next, and then it'll say pre-installation summary, that's okay too, hit next. Setup is now ready to begin. Hit next and let it install onto your computer. I'm going to fast forward until this is done installing. Okay, that has finished installing for me. Keep in mind, if you're running an older version of Mac OS or you have a much older MacBook that you updated to the latest version of Mac OS, you sometimes get an error that says something like database cluster initialization couldn't be done or could not be found, etc. If you get an error at that particular step between hitting install and then actually finishing the wizard, it most likely means that you need to downgrade to a lower version of PostgreSQL. So if you get an error saying something about the database cluster initialization not being set up correctly, go ahead and try a much lower version of PostgreSQL, like 9.7 or something like 10. So don't go for the latest one. Okay, in my case, it looks like everything went well. It's going to ask you if you want to launch Stack Builder at exit. We don't need to do that, so go ahead and unclick that, and then just hit finish. Okay. And now we've taken care of step 1, which was installing PostgreSQL. It's time to move on to step 2. Step 2 is to download and install pgadmin. pgadmin is the graphical user interface that we'll be using to connect with PostgreSQL. And what's really interesting about the latest version of pgadmin is that it actually opens up in your browser. Let's go ahead and show you how to download it. To do this, we'll go to our browser. Okay, here I am at the browser. What you're going to go ahead and do is just input pgadmin, go ahead and Google search, and after the advertisements, the first thing you should see is www.pgadmin.org. So that's the official website for pgadmin. Go ahead and click on it. And this is an open source, free, and it's the most popular way to work with PostgreSQL. And what we're going to do here is somewhere here you should be able to see that there's a download button. There's also an interesting online demo if you want to check it out, so you can kind of quickly see what's going on online without downloading anything. But go ahead and go to download. We'll go to pgadmin, and the latest version is pgadmin 4. If you're running a really old version of macOS, you may need to run pgadmin 3. It will warn you that it's actually no longer supported, but that basically means that they're not supporting pgadmin with the latest versions of PostgreSQL. That's okay if you're running an older version of macOS. You can go ahead and just click on macOS under pgadmin 3. I'm running the latest version of macOS, so I will go ahead and select macOS under pgadmin 4. That will take me to the downloads here. You can see that there's various versions of pgadmin 4. They keep updating it with more features or better workings under the hood. I'll go ahead and just select the newest version, which in my case was 4.18. You'll see here that it'll take you to kind of this interesting file browser directory. There's different files here. Really what we're looking for is just this .dmg file, which is the typical installer for any application on a Mac OS. You'll notice that it's by far the largest file. So that's actually the only one we need here is the largest file, which is the .dmg file. Go ahead and click on it. And upon clicking on it, what we're going to do is we're going to save this to our downloads folder. So I will save that to downloads, and that's going to download that .dmg file. Going to fast forward in time until this is done downloading it, and then we'll walk through the installation. Okay, this DMG file has finished downloading it. I'll go ahead and open it. So this is essentially running the installer. And we'll go ahead and agree to the terms. And then it's going to open the .dmg file. It'll verify this. This may take a couple of seconds. And then you should see a little window that looks something like this, pgadmin 4. And right now what this has done is it has pgadmin 4 ready to go. But what we need to do is to make sure this is saved on our computer and we don't accidentally start reinstalling it every time to open it. We need to save this and move this to our applications. So what you need to do is in your Finder window, go ahead and look for your applications folder. You can come here to applications, click on that. So here we have our applications folder. This should actually be under favorites by default. It's essentially where all your applications live. And if you notice here and start scrolling down to P, you have PostgreSQL available for you, but you don't yet have pgadmin 4. So what we need to do is simply grab pgadmin 4 and drag it and move it to applications. Okay, and what that is going to do is that will finish the entire installation process. Otherwise, you would accidentally be reinstalling pgadmin each time you actually wanted to open it. Okay, so that's it for installing pgadmin 4, is following through that .dmg procedure and then making sure that you actually copy the pgadmin 4 and move it over to your applications. All right, so Once that has moved over to the applications, you can go ahead and close this initial window. It's quite a large file, so keep that in mind. I'm going to fast forward in time until this is done copying over. Okay, now that has finished being transferred over to under Applications. If you don't see it under Applications after you transfer over to it, you may need to click on Desktop and then come back to Applications in order to see the actual change occur inside of your little Finder window. So right here, we see pgadmin 4. And if you go back to your desktop, you now no longer have to worry about this little temporary drive that's open. You'll notice there's pgadmin 4 here on your desktop. Go ahead and you can just eject that, and that will remove it from your computer. However, it's safe to say that it still exists on your computer now under Applications. All right, and that concludes step number 2. Step 3 is to download, but not directly open, the dvdrental.tar file. As a resource in this installation lecture, you should see a dvdrental.tar file as a resource to download. What we're going to do is download this file, but do not attempt to unzip the file, double-click on the file, or open the file, or interact with the file in any manner. It's only meant to be interacted with directly through pgadmin. So please do not directly open or interact with the file. Sometimes computers think it's a PDF file or it's a zip file that needs to be unzipped. You do not need to worry about any of that. All we're doing for this step is downloading it. So let's show you how to do that. If you take a quick look at Udemy's support page on course taking, there's an entire article lecture devoted to downloading supplemental resources. Keep in mind this may change in future versions of Udemy, but right now the current way you download them is there's a little icon underneath the lecture called Resources that you just click on, and then it'll have a drop-down menu of the different resources to download. So what's going to happen is, as you're watching the actual installation lecture, you'll be at Complete SQL Bootcamp. You'll come over here, and then over here somewhere on the right of this particular lecture, you'll hit Resources, and then you'll see this dvdrental.tar file. You'll go ahead and click on that, and you'll save it, and make sure to save it underneath your downloads. You must remember where this is saved. So go ahead and save that to your downloads, and that's all we're going to do for this step. Do not attempt to double-click on this file or open this file or unzip this file. That will cause an error for the rest of the installation process. So once you've downloaded it, that's it, and that's all you need to do for that. Okay, let's move on to the next step. All right, step number 4 is to restart your computer. In order to make sure your computer has attributed all the changes necessary for PostgreSQL and pgadmin, it's common that we need to restart your computer. So go ahead and just restart your computer, and we'll move on to the next step. All right, step number 5 is essentially the last step where we're going to be restoring the database. Keep in mind, there may be a failed Execode that appears, and you can safely ignore it. In some particular versions of PostgreSQL, along with some particular versions of macOS, you get a failed Execode that pops up because the database attempts to restore itself twice. And what happens is it works fine on the first time, and then it gets an error the second time because it works successfully the first time. So if you get that failed Execode, it's totally safe to ignore it. So we'll go ahead and try our best to show you how to ignore that Execode. But again, if you get a failed Execode 1, you can safely ignore that Execode. In order to restore the database, we'll need to start up pgadmin. So let's do that. To start up pgadmin, all you need to do is search for pgadmin, and it should autocomplete with pgadmin 4 underneath your applications. Go ahead and open that. So we'll double click on that, and what's going to happen is it's going to start up pgadmin for us. It'll verify it. You may get this warning saying it's downloaded from the internet. Are you sure you want to open it? Go ahead and say open. If it does not allow you to open it from the internet, go ahead and just change your settings to allow you to open things from unidentified developers. If you're not sure how to do that, you can just Google search the actual message that pops up, and there's pretty much tons of tutorials online that teach you how to just go to your settings and edit it so you can open that up. Okay, so I'll go ahead and open it. You'll see this little icon appear, pgadmin management tools, and this may take a few minutes, especially the first time it's ever opening it. But what's going to happen is eventually it's going to open up in your browser. And we'll go ahead and allow notifications from pgadmin. So I'm going to forward in time until this is done. Oh, there we go. So it's already running, and it's going to open up in your browser. And what it's going to ask you is to set the master password for pgadmin. Keep in mind, this is technically a different password than the PostgreSQL user password. This is just for pgadmin. However, I would highly recommend that you set this to something either the same as Postgres or just something you can really remember. In my case, I'll keep it simple. and just set this as password. And be careful when you're spelling this because there is no confirmed password, which is kind of a design flaw here. But just go ahead and I'm going to choose lowercase password. Make sure you write this down somewhere. Hit OK. And then you should see something that looks like this. So we have pgadmin4. It's running in our browser. You can always copy and paste this URL if you want to use a different internet browser. It'll open up in your default one. Underneath servers, if you expand on this, what you should see is PostgreSQL 12. Now, if you've already installed older versions of PostgreSQL on your computer, you may actually see those pop up. In my case, I actually installed 9.5 earlier, so I see that pop up. But you should see PostgreSQL 12 here. If you don't see it, make sure you've already restarted your computer. And then expand this again. And when you're trying to expand it, it's going to ask you to enter the password for Postgres. That's the same password that was set up during the first initial installation of PostgreSQL. That's why it's so important that you remember what that password is. In my case, I just kept it all lowercase password. So that should be good to go. Go ahead and select Save Password. Again, if you do not remember the Postgres password, there's really nothing I can do for you here. You'll need to start over since the very beginning. Okay, then hit OK. That should work since that was the correct password. And now we can see a bunch of information about the dashboard, etc. What we're going to do here is just restore our database. So to do this, I'm going to first create, underneath databases, a new database. I can see there's one that already exists called Postgres. I'm going to right click here and hit create and then database. And we're going to call this database DVD rental. So call the database DVD rental and then go ahead and hit save. The owner should be by default Postgres. Hit save. And now you'll see you have this new DVD rental database that we're not yet connected to. If you click on it, you should see it get colored in, and now we're connected to it. And now it's time to actually put the information into this database by restoring from that dvdrental.tar file. So I'm going to right click here, and I'm going to go down to where it says restore. Click on restore. So what we need to do is we need to tell pgadmin where our dvdrental.tar file is actually located. So we need to find the file name. So most people are going to be able to click on these 3 points here and then actually search their computer for it. However, for some users, especially on macOS Catalina, there's been some issues lately of just stuff being locked or not being able to actually find the file itself. So here maybe you can search on under applications, double click on that and then keep going forward. But what I'm going to do is show you the fail-proof way, which is just to manually provide the file name. And I prefer this way anyways. So what we're going to do is we're going to remember that we saved that dvdrental.tar file underneath downloads. So open up your downloads folder and you should see dvdrental.tar. So we know it's located under downloads. All I want to do is grab the complete file path. So I'll right click on dvdrental.tar. Again, that's a right click and then select get info. And here I can see where, and it's going to tell me it's under Macintosh HD, users, and in my particular username is Marcy here, and then downloads. So what I'll do is I'll highlight that entirety of where, right click, hit copy, then come back here to restore, and then select paste. So notice now it gives me the file path users, Marcy downloads. Then we'll complete this by saying /DVD rental.tar. And that's going to be the complete file path telling pgadmin, go look at this location and look at this file. The next thing we need to do before we hit restore is go to restore options and select pre-data, data, and post-data. And then come back to general, and then we're ready to go. Hit restore, and it will attempt to restore this. It'll ask you, would you like to access your downloads folder? Go ahead and allow it to. Once you hit OK here, and that should actually complete the restoration process. Keep in mind that you may actually see this failed Xcode 1 pop up. It's totally okay if you see that. You can go ahead and ignore that. It just means that it attempted to restore it twice, which is totally okay. So go ahead and exit this. And then what we're going to do here is we're going to say on DVD rental, right click and refresh in order to have those changes take place. And now let's attempt our first query on this DVD rental database. We're going to right click and select Query Tool. And Query Tool is essentially where we spend the rest of the course. This is where we actually learn and type out SQL. So we're going to type out select space asterisk space from space film semicolon. And then we'll go ahead and run this. And upon running that, you should see here under data output just some film IDs, titles, descriptions, etc. And now you successfully restored the database and you queried it for more information. And we'll talk about what this actually means later on in the course, but this is just the general query editor. Okay, if you get some sort of error saying film not recognized or not found, make sure that you follow the steps exactly. So you may have to go back and restart your computer. Or what you could also do is try using a lower version of PostgreSQL if that error keeps coming back, because most likely what's happening is that your particular version of macOS wasn't suitable for the most recent version of PostgreSQL. Okay, if you're able to run this query and see these results, then you're ready to go. I'll see you in the next lecture. Welcome everyone to this lecture on an overview of the graphical user interface we use for this course, which is pgadmin version 4. So by now you should have gone through the installation lecture, have pgadmin and PostgreSQL installed and set up, and you should have been able to perform your first SQL query in the query editor or query tool. What I want to do now is just quickly go over some of pgadmin features. Keep in mind, this is kind of an optional lecture. We're going to be going over things like how to change font size, how to choose a dark theme, how to get shortcuts from within pgadmin. If that sort of stuff doesn't really interest you, or if you're fine with the defaults, or if you feel comfortable enough that you can quickly just Google search how to change these sort of things, feel free to continue on with the rest of the course, since this particular lecture technically isn't about SQL. It's just a quick overview of the graphical interface. If you are interested in those things, go ahead and continue along by opening up pgadmin. So let's head over to pgadmin now. Okay, here I am inside of pgadmin. When you open up pgadmin, you'll see the servers here. You'll see a dashboard as well. And what's nice is it has some useful links such as adding a new server if that's necessary, how to go to the documentation, the pgadmin official website, etc. So if you expand on servers, you should then see the PostgreSQL version you installed. And then if you expand on that, you'll see databases and you'll see your DVD rental database. Note here, I have a couple more databases. Later on in the course, we'll actually be creating some of these databases, so don't worry about that yet. But you should see the DVD rental database that you created in the installation lecture. So let's go ahead and just show you a couple of useful things for pgadmin. First, I want to start off by how to edit your preferences, visual preferences for pgadmin. If you come to File, select Preferences, you'll see a wide variety of preferences. A lot of these are geared towards advanced users. So you have things like what to display on the dashboard, what graphs to show and the refresh rate for them. But probably the ones you guys are most interested in is if you come to Miscellaneous and select Themes, there's currently a standard theme, but the latest version of pgadmin 4 released, right now as I'm filming this, has a beta dark version. Now, since this is technically in beta, I didn't want my pgadmin to crash as I was filming, so this course is filmed in the standard theme. But if you're working on SQL in a dark room or it's nighttime and you want to rest your eyes a bit, you can always select the dark theme for your own pgadmin. The other thing I want to point out is the query tool is really where we spend most of the time in this course. And the query editor specifically is really what we're working with. And if you ever want to change the font size for the query editor, you can come here under Query Tool, Editor, go to Font Size, and then you can change the font size here. Something to note is that the font size is actually not something like 12-point font like you would have in a normal word processor. It's actually a relative font size. So if you want to double the current font size, you would type in a 2 because that's a 2-to-1 ratio. If you want to increase the font size by 20%, you would type in 1.2. So up to a maximum of 10, so that's 10x the default font size, which is probably way too large, but this is something you can play around with. You can see here I have 1.4. So we'll go ahead and just not have any changes, set that to cancel, and those are the main preferences for visual things you can edit. The other thing I want to point out here is if I go ahead and click on DVD rental and select that object, I see this dashboard start to show up and just give me information of things. Things like how many transactions am I performing on this particular database per second. You can see here that essentially I'm not really doing anything right now with it, so it's kind of a flat line. And you can always edit what's shown in the dashboard, again, by going to your preferences, dashboards, display, graphs, and you can refresh this faster, choose things not to display, etc. Let's go ahead and cancel that. And then the real thing that's pretty important to understand here is if you have your database selected, there's a variety of tabs here on properties, SQL, statistics, dependencies, dependents, etc. And we're going to be understanding these, particularly what this actually means here with SQL later on in this course. But really, where we spend most of the time here is if you right-click, you see the Query Tool option. That's where we spend most of the time. And if you have an object selected, you can also then go to Object up here in the top toolbar, and it will give you the same abilities, either under Object or under tools such as Query Tool. And you can easily get those again by right-clicking on the database. So it's essentially you can either get them here from the top toolbar or by right-clicking and selecting the toolbar here. So let's go ahead and right-click on this, open up an example query editor. So here I have my query editor. Something to note about the query editor is you have this nice query history option. So if we perform the same query we did at the beginning, select from film, and then I can either run this with play or by refreshing with F5. You'll see some results here, and obviously we don't know SQL quite yet to understand everything here, but we see a data output, which is the rows, and then the columns. We see explain. Sometimes it will have something to explain, especially if you're inserting stuff into a table. Right now we are not doing anything advanced enough to see an explanation. There's messages. You should always pretty much see a message indicating whether or not your query actually worked. Also, how fast it was, which is kind of nice if you want to compare queries. And then any notifications if necessary. In this case, this is simple enough that there are no notifications. So beyond this data output, what's nice also here available to us in the query editor is you can go to your query history. So here I can see a variety of query histories. I'm going to have a lot more history than you because this is from filming other things for the course that you've seen here. But what's nice about this is, let's say I take a look at some historical query. I can either just copy that query or I can copy to query editor, select that, and it will automatically copy and paste something from history directly to the query editor, so I can run that as well. And don't worry about understanding this SQL code. We actually cover this later on in the course. Another thing I want to show you is if you're actually selecting something from the data output and you decided, hey, I want to share this with somebody else as a CSV file, you can come over here to this little download icon and it will download the current results as a CSV, which is a comma-separated variable file, and that's the kind of file that you can open easily with Excel or a wide variety of programs. So that might be helpful to you if you're trying to build a report for someone else or just share with them the results. Now, the other thing I want to point out here is because this is in the browser, sometimes you'll accidentally click on this query tool and drag it out, and then you get this kind of weird separate window. If that ever happens to you, if anything, you can always just grab it again and then snap it back as if it was a tab. So I'm going to grab this, and note here it's kind of going to highlight that I'm putting it back in there, and I will snap it back to the main tab. And the last thing I want to show you is how to quickly access online help. So if you come over here to help, there's both help on pgadmin, which is the graphical user interface, and help on PostgreSQL. So if you click on pgadmin website, it takes us to that official website. You can click here on documentation, introduction, 4.19, which is the latest version I installed, and it has pretty much the entire description of everything you see within pgadmin. So if for some reason you're super interested in the toolbar, for instance, you can click on toolbar here, and it will describe everything available to you inside the toolbar. So that is available to you under help, pgadmin website, and then underneath the pgadmin website, you simply come to documentation and select the version that's appropriate for you. Okay, the other thing I want to show you is the PostgreSQL website is also available to you underneath directly pgadmin. So you go to postgresql.org, go to documentation, choose the version we're using, which is 12, and then you'll see the documentation here. So maybe you're interested in queries, which is what we're going to cover. Click on that, and it'll give you an overview of table expressions such as the from clause. Now, the whole point of this course is for you not having to read through the documentation. For more advanced SQL commands, we will reference the documentation for things like useful lookup tables or useful functions. For example, later on we'll cover mathematical functions, and instead of listing them all in the video, we'll just reference the documentation for you to visit. So you can always quite easily visit the documentation by simply coming to Help, PostgreSQL website, and then selecting Documentation, along with an online manual for your current release. Okay, so that's pretty much all you need to know for now. We'll cover some other useful features of pgadmin that are more specific to things like create table commands much later on in the course. All you really need to know for now is how to access that query tool, which is the same thing we did in the installation lecture. Thanks, and I will see you at the next lecture.